I never liked it on the ground. I'm not coming down. I want to go higher, higher, higher than that.
Welcome back to the Business is Human podcast, where we discuss strategies to increase our VRI, value, relevance, and impact. We're here to blend meaningful work with profitable success. I'm your host, Rebecca Fleetwood Hession, here to steward what we call the age of humanity, to transform the way we work so we can transform the way that we live. As always, my friendly request, if you like what you hear, hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. And then leave a review to tell the other humans that they might like it too. Always looking to help you and connect with others. Let's get into it, shall we? In celebration of Veterans Day, we have another veteran on the show today. And I am excited for you to hear from Urs Koenig because his background is extraordinary. Military background alone, UN military peacekeeper, NATO military peacekeeping commander, in addition to being an ultra-endurance champion, athlete, a professor, experienced executive coach. His credentials are extraordinary. And so what's really interesting is the topic that we're going to cover today is humility. And I love the juxtaposition of the command and control, ultra-endurance athlete coming in to talk to us about humility. And it's something that he's so passionate about. He has released a book called Radical Humility. And of course, the tagline, just got me because the tagline is be a badass leader and a good human. The two things that just speak to my heart. So here we go. I can't wait for you to hear this interview. Urs, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rebecca, for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I was going to introduce you as the Bear King because that's what your name means, but I figured you should probably give a little context about that. That might be awkward.
Well, my first name is Urs, which is very hard to pronounce in America, URS. And the root of that name is the bear. Ursus means the bear. And then my last name in German is Koenig, which means king. So my parents really did name me the Bear King. So, I wrote the book on humble leadership, but there you have it.
That is ironic. Was it intentional that they named you based on those things?
No, it wasn't. And in fact, I give my parents a hard time because it's such a hard name, my first name, to pronounce in English-speaking countries, and they traveled a lot. In fact, when I was 2, we moved to New Zealand. Nobody could pronounce my name as a child, so it was intentional.
Well, maybe that does tie into humility more than we think it will, but I love etymology and this just studying language and words. So I was like, I hope that it was like super intentional, but that's okay. We're going to give them a pass on that. Okay, so I am so excited about this because when I saw the cover of your book, Radical Humility, be a badass leader and a good human. Those who have been following this show or know me for 5 minutes know that this whole framework around business is human is so near and dear to my heart. And because I have the Badass Women's Council as part of my brand, I'm like, I got to talk to this guy. So this is an exciting time for me because I love when many of us out in the world get ideas for similar things, because to me, I live a lot in the world of Holy Spirit. I believe that means we've all been given this idea because it's so important. So, immature me would have thought it was competition, right? Similar to what I do. And now I see it as we're all part of a community that are taking messages out into the world that are really needed today. So tell us a little bit about how this book came to be a book. I know you've been an executive coach for many, many years, and you noticed some of these things with your clients, right?
That's exactly right. Well, first of all, thank you, Rebecca, for all the great work you're doing in the world. It's so much needed. So yes, I've been an executive coach for many years, and then I was always drawn to humility as a personal trait. So I have a background as an ultra-endurance competitor. So in the world of ultra cycling, I loved the people who let the legs do the talking versus the big mouth. But I never studied it, to be quite honest, in any seriousness for leadership. But then as we came out of the financial crisis and social media started to explode and the pace of change just accelerated, my clients, my executive coaching clients, were still leading, a lot of them top-down, command control, what I call heroic leadership. The leader sits on top of the org chart, has all the answers. Everything needs to flow through him or her. And they were always a step or two behind. So I started to then dig more seriously into, okay, we need a different kind of leadership. And of course, there's plenty of leadership models, servant leadership and transformational leadership. But I found humility. And I started to study humble leadership in more seriousness. And then, Edgar Schein, one of the legends of organizational development, wrote the groundbreaking book on humble leadership. Of course, I was digging that. But then on a personal level, Rebecca, two things happened. I went and deployed after having been out of the military for 22 years on my first peacekeeping mission in the Balkans in 2017, and then 2 years ago for the UN to the Middle East. And ironically, going back into what we think of as a top-down command control environment, the military showed me that the best commanders, the best bosses I had in these missions were deeply humble. They had great self-awareness. They built meaningful relationships with their soldiers, with their team members, and they really embodied this notion of producing, badass results or being a badass leader and a good human. So then when I came back from the second peacekeeping mission, I said, okay, there's a book here. There's a book about how we can do both. And I know that's very dear to your heart. We can achieve amazing results and do it in a human way. So that's how the book came about and then I published it 6 months ago, yeah.
Well, what's really fascinating is, I always know that it's going to improve results when you have this type of leadership. But what you have just called out that I've not done enough of that, I don't think, is calling out the opposite, which is the heroic leadership they were actually behind. So they thought they were getting ahead of things by being top down, by being heroic, and that actually had the opposite effect.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So leading in today's VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, it's by definition humbling. So if you're the command control leader, everything has to flow through you. You're going to be always a step or two behind. And by the way, we're facing an inversion of expertise. McChrystal, who I quote extensively, General McChrystal in the book, he was actually one of the first truly humble leaders. He talks about the inversion of expertise, meaning our people will always know so much more than we ever can and should about the level of expertise. So for them to come to us with the data and information we need as leaders to make good decisions, they need to trust us. And the only way they'll trust us is if we've built meaningful and collaborative relationships with them. So I talked about McChrystal. He has a nice metaphor. He shifted his leadership when he was commanding the task force in the Middle East fighting terror from what he called leading like a chess master, like controlling his pawns on the chessboard, to leading like a gardener. As a gardener, you can't make plants grow. Much like in leadership, we can't make our people develop and grow. But what we can and what we must do is we provide the right environment, or we call it the right culture. So the right people are in the right spot. We nurture. Sometimes we need to weed as well. That's part of it. That's part of that. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do is we can actually let somebody go. So humility in leadership does not mean being weak or having no spine.
It's funny you say that. Not too long ago, I said to a client who was struggling with some things with their team and their people, I said, we really haven't evolved past being just houseplants that talk. Like if you provide the right environment and you water it and you feed it and you talk nice to it, let's not overcomplicate things.
Right. Well, you and I have been in leadership development for a long time. It's very simple, but it's not always easy, right? Yeah,
Amen.
exactly.
Amen. Amen. Well, and I love that your background is the opposite of what many people might traditionally look at as humble. A wildly successful career, military, traditionally a top-down culture. You're an elite, ultra athlete. And I just saw recently, I think on LinkedIn, where you did some sort of crazy athletic thing, not even for competition, just for like fun on a Saturday. What was that about?
It's called Everesting. So people who are in the ultra endurance world know this. So it's the equivalent of climbing the altitude of Mount Everest nonstop, so 29,000 feet. And so I did a thing in the Swiss Alps, I'm originally Swiss, where I took 23 hours. I parked 4 mountain bikes at the top of the mountain. I climbed up during the day, the gondola was running. During the day, I climbed up 3,600 feet, took the gondola down, and then at night, there's no gondola, right? So I had the mountain bikes parked. So I rode the mountain bikes down during the night. So yeah, it's an Everesting thing. And I know this is not a podcast about ultra endurance stuff, but I love these adventures. And there is a tie to humble leadership. You live, I live. Everybody who does it, we live in the moment, right here, right now. Everything else falls away. I'm not thinking about my speaking clients. I'm not thinking about the next podcast. I'm being in the here and now. Do I eat enough? What needs to happen next? Am I going the right way? So I love the focus, and that's actually one aspect of humility, which I think a lot of us can benefit from. Humility also means knowing that we can't achieve everything, but we can achieve almost anything if we put our hearts and minds to it. And so this notion of saying no, stop doing lists, focusing. So elite athletes are, great examples at the ability to compartmentalize, focus on what truly matters. And as many have said, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have none. One thing I try to do every morning is like, what are the 3 things I want to focus on today? And not more, 3 things.
I was on the team that launched the book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution for the Franklin Covey organization. And that's one of the main tenets. So I do the same thing.
Right.
But I want to tie into that elite athlete aspect of things, because you're doing this ultra, most people would call crazy thing for fun, or just, to train, or just to remind yourself what you can do. And it's not for a trophy. It's not for an award. To me, that is humility. It's saying, I love pushing myself. I love the focus. I love this aspect of it. But the other thing I want to take away from what you said is that requires being in the moment, to be focused on what's happening. And when I think about humble leaders, they have this ability when they're talking to you to be in the moment. And you can tell they're not distracted by this other meeting. And they have so many other things spinning in their head. But when they're with you, they're with you.
That is so well said, Rebecca. And so that is exactly right. A core element of humble leadership is relationship building. And by the way, I always say, we don't have to have our best friends at work. But the research shows if you have a best friend at work, you're 7 times more likely to hang around, and you're 7 times more productive. And how do we build that? Those relationships are exactly that. As leaders, our most important currency is our attention, our time, and our attention.
Yeah.
So, the undivided listening to what really is going on for you, seeking to understand versus pushing my own agenda. So that is an absolute crucial aspect of humble leadership. But again, and I know that's close to your heart as well, it doesn't mean that I'm just going to do everything you tell me. I am so keenly listening. I want to understand where you're coming from, but I still have my agenda as a boss of what we need to get done together. No question.
Yeah. Well, you said in your book, I love people. And one of the things that you would do when you had a new team is you would make sure you went to lunch with them, you got to know them, and you also respected their boundaries. Talk about that a little bit. I thought that was really important and insightful that you saw that as a two-way opportunity.
I think that's a really important point, because when I challenge people to deepen relationships, to take them for lunch, get to know them on a human level, I sometimes get pushback because I don't want to either ask or reveal my darkest secrets and all my fears. And that's a really important thing. So when we start to build and deepen relationships at work, we will have different levels of depth of relationships with different people. And that's totally fine. Some people will open up about, end of life decisions and their faith or whatever. And with others, we just talk about our kids' soccer game on Sunday. It doesn't matter. There's a human connection. And so it's, this is why I call leadership a thinking person sport. Because don't push the boundaries. If you feel and sense somebody's uncomfortable opening up, then you don't push. So absolutely.
Say more about that. A thinking person's sport, leadership. Say more about that. I love that.
I'm actually going to come back to one thing you said. I put forward, if you want to be a leader, you fundamentally have to love people. I actually believe that to be true. By the way, it doesn't mean that you have to be an extrovert at all. Doesn't mean that at all. But you fundamentally have to enjoy and love people. And so when I talk about the thing, sports and sport, it's exactly that. It's reading the other person. So getting better, and we all can always improve on that. I'm work in progress on that. Reading body language, reading, cues. Can I deepen this relationship, or do I pull back a little bit? So yeah, thinking person sport and feelings person sport, by the way. Again, the yin yang, right? Thinking and
100%,
feeling.
100%. Which brings me to really the heart of your book as I was going through it is none of this means that we aren't going after business results. Yeah. I mean, you and I are both business people, like for decades. It's who we are, and we care about getting results. And so the way you framed it in the book is tough on results. Like we're gonna get this done. We're gonna achieve the goal, but tender on people.
Right.
Okay, so give us some tips and how do we do that?
Let me actually tell you a quick little anecdote. So when I was in Kosovo, my first peacekeeping mission, I had a wonderful commander, probably the best commander I've ever had, who I deeply respected, and he really got to know me. So he asked me to his office. I sat down, and he opened the meeting with these words. He said, "Urs, I love you. You know I do. And your work is not even close to being good enough." His words made me shrink in my chair. And of course, I then, because I actually, he showed me, not just told me, showed me that he really cared for me. I then really was able to take his feedback in and turn it around big time. The point here is, if he would have yelled at me, if he would have belittled me, I would have tuned him out like an other idiot high officer who who cares, right? But being tender on people gives us actually license to be tough on results. So another wonderful example, I don't know if you're a soccer or the real football fan, but the former US women's soccer captain, Carla Overbeck, only scored 7 goals in her entire international career. She would always humbly look for ways to pass the ball, but she had an incredible work ethic. She also schlepped her teammates back to their hotel room as the captain if the flight was particularly grueling. So she was really tender on people. Because she was so tender on people, she amassed huge credit that she could then spend with her teammates when she needed to hold them accountable. So the tender on people gives us license to be tough on results. And, I often get pushback against this. And we all have too much to do. We just talked about priorities, no more than 3. I don't have time for this. Like relationship building, like my to-do list is endless. And I agree. It's never efficient in the short term to be tender on people, but it always pays in the long run. We never know who we have to rely on when the famous stuff hits the fan, right? And so it's about proactively building these relationships. It's a proactive move.
I agree wholeheartedly. And as we're seeing employee engagement numbers drop and drop and drop since 2020, I've said it so many times, you're going to have to invest in people as an individual, not as don't call them by the acronym of the group. Don't treat them like a machine there to produce. They are a beautiful, unique human. We're all unique down to our fingerprints. And to your earlier point, and if you don't love the dynamic of that human to human, you're going to struggle as a leader even more now than we ever have in the past, I believe. Yeah.
And if I may, on the tender on people.
Yeah.
One of the most powerful ways, which makes a lot of people uncomfortable, to start building and deepening those relationships is actually to show up with a bit of vulnerability, to reveal something about myself. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about, opening every meeting crying and my parents never really loved me. No, that's not what I'm talking about. It's about getting eye to eye, maybe share a goal you have for yourself, maybe something where you're not quite sure about, talk about vulnerability in 3 acts. The first act is me. The second act is my share. Maybe I have a little insecurity, something I'm working on. And the third act is, what am I going to do about it? So 3 acts. And so I have a, in the Middle East, my commanding officer opened an after action review with these words. In front of everybody, she said, I screwed that up. And here is what I'm going to do about it. So her ability to go first with a bit of vulnerability built huge trust. All of us then felt comfortable to share whatever we did well, and also what we messed up, all because she went first with a bit of vulnerability. There is so much research out there that vulnerability is one of the quickest and most effective ways to build trusting relationships. And again, thinking person sport. I don't need to tell you my family of origin stuff, but lots of other ways to do that.
Right. Well, and it ties back to a couple of things that we talk about a lot here on the show, which is the very root cause of burnout is to prove yourself. And what you're talking about is to know yourself in a really deep way, to really have a sense of security and confidence in who you are allows you to be vulnerable. I know we've talked about similarities there. And the other thing that you're tapping into is our nervous system has to feel safe in order to be our best self and take steps forward. And so when someone shares that you're safe to make a mistake and that they've made a mistake, you actually are more confident and bold in your decision making because you feel like this is a safe place to be yourself.
So well said. I mean, there's so many good studies on psychological safety, which you're sort of pointing to, but you bring up a really important point, which I, elaborate in the book as well. Confidence and humility are not opposites. In fact, they require each other. So I need to be, as you just said, I need to be fundamentally confident in myself and have a strong sense of self to actually share with humility, with a bit of vulnerability, what I'm working on. And then, or even just ask for feedback and then actually hear that feedback and act on it. So the former CEO of Intuit, I love this story, Brad Smith. So he did a 360, volunteered a 360, and as many viewers know, a 360 anonymously surveys everybody around your strengths and weaknesses. And for those of us who have never done it, it's a very scary exercise, actually. But Smith did not stop there. He then shared his 360 report with the entire company. He emailed the 360 report to every single person in the company. He even taped the copy to his office door, right, for everybody to see, including, by the way, because I fit the third act, including his action steps as well. And so what did that do? The top dog, the CEO, publicly traded company, shares his strengths, weaknesses, his action plan with everybody in the company, built humongous trust across the whole organization. And importantly, it made it safe for everybody to start working on their own stuff. Like that is how you lead by example with vulnerability and build trust.
Amen. And every time we talk about, oh my gosh, I just literally want to just be like, everybody just take a note now, just like write that down. Let's just all absorb that for a minute. Because when we talk about these things from a business context, as a mom of young adults, I always think about our parenting too. I always think about my best parenting moments were when I opened up and shared about things that I had messed up, or just gave so much grace when my kids were messing up. They're supposed to mess up while they're here under our roof. And that's our job, is to kind of nurture them along. And I think in our society, we've become so achievement focused at such a young age. I think it's hurting us even in business because many haven't been raised with this kind of vulnerability that you're talking about. In fact, it's quite the opposite, that they're afraid to share that they're afraid or not performing because there's nobody around to be a safe place for that. And that makes my heart hurt.
I agree, by the way. A lot of the concepts we talk about in leadership so apply to parenting. I have teenagers, so my kids are a bit younger, it sounds like. I've got 2 boys, 17 and 19. Wow. And I am such a work in progress as a dad. Like, are you kidding me? It's the most humbling experience of my life. And by the way, it's the hardest job I ever loved. And sometimes I'm not even sure I love it, to be quite honest. Sometimes,
I get it. Yeah.
But I do this. I ask my boys regularly, for feedback. Like, what can I do better? And I got challenged by another podcast host recently. Well, but I need to put them in bed by 10. He has younger kids. And I said, okay, that's a non-negotiable. Like, you go to bed at 10, like, I don't get feedback on, is it okay to go to bed at 10? But I helped my boy with schoolwork. I might be a bit impatient because I actually have emails I need to respond to. Now I'm getting pulled away. And everybody who has kids and works knows that feeling, right? So, and then I asked for feedback. Hey, how did I show up while we did homework together? Especially if I'm, maybe I think I was a bit impatient. What do you think? And so absolutely, we can apply these lessons to parenting as well. No question.
Yeah, I think we'll get a lot of ripple effect out of that as a society if we can practice. Maybe you're listening to this and you're like, maybe I'm not ready to do this at work. Maybe I'll just start and try it.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Well, It makes me think of my most vulnerable, but said not really nicely with my son, who was my first. And he was probably, I don't know, 11, 12 years old. And we're in the car together and he's just angry with me. I had promised something and then I couldn't fulfill that promise, probably a commitment about time or something. And he was just angry at me. And we were driving out in the country and I literally stopped the truck in the middle of the road and I put it in park, middle of the country, nobody around. And I looked at him and I said, you know, you're my first child, right? And he said, what's that got to do with it? I said, I have no idea what I'm doing. You literally are the guinea pig that's going to make your sister's life better. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I messed up. I'm going to need a pass on this. He got so quiet and so reflective. You could just see his wheels turning. And I was angry because we were in this fight. And I just was like, I got to sit here for a minute. And finally, he just looked at me. He goes, oh my God, you're right. You don't know what you're doing. I'm like, most days, no, I really don't. But if you could give me some grace, I think we could probably figure this out together. Does that sound okay? And it changed the trajectory of our relationship. He's now 26. We have an amazing relationship. But I think that moment was a big part of that.
I love that. And you know what? He's going to remember that when does he have children on his own yet?
No, not yet.
He's going to remember that scene when he has, or he doesn't now, I'm sure, but when he has children on
We
his own.
laugh about it, talk about
totally.
it.
So good. So good. I love it.
Oh my gosh, it just popped into my head. Well, and it makes me think about another way that you said something in the book that I really loved. You said, growth lies behind the door called discomfort. A lot of what we're talking about requires some level of discomfort for us to build these skills and this mindset. Talk a little bit about how that you came to that. I love that line.
Well, I think that's true across everything we do, not just leadership, right? So if we want to grow, we need to put ourselves in a position where we will potentially fail. And that is really uncomfortable because this sounds like cliches, but they're still true. If we're not putting ourselves into a position to fail, we're not actually chartering into new territory. If we're not failing, we're not learning new stuff. And so that's uncomfortable. One other aspect I didn't write about in the book, but it sort of came to me over the last few months is that's very true. Like we need to push ourselves into a level of discomfort. At the same time, we need to all be also thoughtful and be kind to ourselves. Because if we put ourselves into uncomfortable situations in like 3 areas of our lives, right? At work, we really push ourselves, and at home, and then we have some crazy hobby or we volunteer at our kids' school, whatever, then we overstretch ourselves and then we don't actually learn. So why I strongly believe, yes, we have to push ourselves to be uncomfortable and, to come back to the relationship building piece, maybe open up a little bit more than we normally would, maybe go a little bit deeper with our relationship building. And I speak for myself here, frankly, coming out of the book launch, busy, full of speaking ahead. I need to also take care of myself. And then it's totally fine if I make myself uncomfortable during the week. On the weekend, I can be in my comfort zone and recharge. So again, it's a yin yang there as well.
Yeah, agree wholeheartedly. In fact, just a few days ago, I was leading a session and humility was a topic there as well. And I said, what words come to mind when you hear the word humility? And one woman said selflessness. And I said, it's not going to get you humility. And we had this really great conversation about that's not what we're talking about. In fact, humility requires you to have really good self-care and really good confidence, because you got to be able to show up and be really confident in who you are. And I think there's too much misconception about what we really mean by humility. It takes a lot of intention and effort and taking care of ourselves to do that
Absolutely.
kind of work.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll share this with you as a little nugget. We use this metaphor, my clients and most people that work with me know this, is when you're going to do something hard that you could possibly fail, the first voice that shows up in your inner voice is your inner critic. And we fondly call her the little bitch in our head, because she's not very nice. She says, why did you try this? This was dumb. I knew this wasn't going to work. And we're always going to have that inner critic voice, right? And so we got to have a relationship with her that we know how to handle her. And so I put her in the passenger seat with a seatbelt and a snack. I metaphorically am like, thanks for participating, but you need to sit over here. You don't get to drive. Like, I'm going to take some action. And then I replace that with the first responder voice. So EMT, firefighter, a first responder who shows up when things look like they're not going well. They don't beat you up. They don't say, what are you, stupid? They may think it, but they don't say it. They say, are you okay? How can I help you? And so that's the way, when I'm in that place of I might fail, I'm feeling really uncomfortable right now, and that inner voice starts to be negative, I go, okay, am I okay? Yeah, I'm okay. What do I really need? It might be I need a break. I might ask for help, but to be kind to yourself when you're challenging yourself in tough times, I think, is also something that we haven't done enough in business.
I love your first responder metaphor. Never thought about it that way. Like, no, they don't come and, how stupid must you be to do X? No, how can I save your life? Or, how can I help? That's really great.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's been really helpful for me and my clients. And I literally use it. I'll be like, hold on, what do I really need? I probably just need to just get some fresh air and a new perspective. It'll take 5 seconds. Just take a break. Yeah, it's really good. Oh my gosh, we could talk about this for days and days and days, but I know our listeners have other things that they need to move on with their day. So I want people to buy your book. The way it's structured is very easy to read, and there's takeaways and action plans on in chapters and sections. So I want people to grab the book. I think it's a kind of a field guide for this, not just a book that they would read. Where can they find your book? I'm assuming everywhere.
That's right. Everywhere, in the States, it's primarily Amazon. Of course, you can Radical Humility on Amazon, or on my website as well, urskoenig.com. And if I may, I'm LinkedIn, pretty active on LinkedIn.
Yes,
so
you are.
I love to connect with people and readers and your listeners on LinkedIn as well, and see and hear what resonates.
Yeah, you put out great posts. I strongly recommend. And you're also a keynote speaker. So if somebody's looking for a speaker, or are you still doing executive coaching as well?
Very little, to be quite honest. Yeah. So I primarily speak these days. So yeah, absolutely.
So I hope that people reach out to you. I love your message. I love getting to know you. Thank you. You absolutely have showed up as the humble leader and person that I knew you'd be.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to this episode. I would love it if you would go to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and a review. And then you can go to RebeccaFleetwoodHession.com and join the Badass Women's Council. And if you really want to take a deeper dive, join the movement of 1,000 Thriving Women. There's amazing Thrive tools there for you today. Love you, mean it.
I'm not coming down.
Hey y'all, fun fact, if you like the music for the podcast, that is actually my son, Cameron Hession. And I would love it if you would go to Spotify and iTunes and follow him and download some of his other music. My personal favorite is TV Land.